I'm Allison Eyring, CEO of Organization Solutions and adjunct professor at NUS Business School. For this edition of Driving Growth, I met recently with Professor Bernard Yeung, Dean of NUS Business School, who's an advocate of the concept of inclusive growth. We're here today to talk about inclusive growth. Could you define what that means?
Inclusive growth, I emphasize, is not about equality in income, but is about as equal as possible in people's access to opportunity, as equal as possible for people to advance themselves, to do the best he or she can. In this context, inclusive growth is that all people with ideas would have the opportunity to access capital, access market opportunities, and use all this to develop great companies.
So the inclusion is inclusion of new businesses and entrepreneurs who can participate in the economic ecosystem.
What I mean is that everyone who can identify a good idea will have the opportunity to come in. Of course, I cannot just say that the door is totally wide open. It has to be the case that the door is open to people who have good ideas, who can show that they are trustworthy, and who can show that they can manage a company.
If I were to Google inclusive growth, what I often will read about is dispersion in the distribution of wages. How is that different from what you're thinking about?
Even distribution of income is not necessarily equal to inclusive growth. Evenness in income distribution is not inclusive growth. Open access to opportunities purely based on capabilities, based on merits, based on performance. To me, that is really the inclusive growth model. There's a very famous Chinese philosopher. His name is Sun Tzu. And the idea is 为其非其. And the only equality is that everyone have the ability to use their different capabilities the best they can to make a living. In this kind of environment, different people with different capability, they would have different earnings. But the only equality is that no matter what your differences are, you do the best you can, and everyone would have an opportunity.
What would you say is the role of education, or specifically business schools, in this concept of inclusive growth?
To me, education has two purposes here: the development of really good, profound knowledge and thought leadership. Two, stimulate our students' development, turn them into very positive beings, that they will have the curiosity, they would have the wide radar screen, and the ability to move people to work together after they connect the dots, to move together with them to make something happen. I want them to recognize that it takes all of us together, it takes teamwork to allow the Asian economic renaissance to be sustainable.
Can you give me an example of a country which is characterized by inclusive growth compared to one that is not?
Wow, that one is not straightforward. It's all a relative matter. In the extreme communist setting, that definitely is not inclusive growth. And I would say that Canada and US, these societies, they do offer a lot of freedoms, a lot of opportunity for people to get advanced. Now, I do not mean that it is completely a laissez-faire society. I think that there is a very significant role for the government as well as for the philanthropists to play in society, to help people who care to advance themselves and to create and capture opportunities, either in just moving up in the economic ladder or to identify opportunities and to use the resources that they can have to create value. All these are extremely important. In this part of the world, we have to be particularly careful. There still exists a lot of concentrated economic decision-making, concentrated control of economic opportunities, a lack of information. In this situation, I think several types play a particularly important role. Number one, the government. They have to be the stewards of social resources and try to help people. So in that context, I would not be I would not object to some government programs that particularly geared to help the helpless. The other thing is that I would advocate that in the boardroom, the directors, they need to be stewards. They need to use the corporate resources and push and advance a bit of the, I would even call it parental care of the resources we have to create value for multiple stakeholders. And third, let me just emphasize this point. Educators, they have a role to play. We have to emphasize the sense of care, the sense of commitment to make a difference.
It sounds like you're talking about the concept of attending to diverse stakeholders. And so it's not just the shareholder, but also employees, people in the communities we serve.
In our society, there already exists a high level of unevenness. We are, I'm talking about Asia in general, still is an emerging economic system. And there are many people who don't even have the chance to think about opportunity. They're just on the barely everyday hand-to-mouth kind of situation. So we have to find a solution to how we level the playing field, how we reduce monopoly power, how we open up more market channels, how we open up more opportunities for people who don't belong to the core group of the monopolist. And that is what I think the inclusive growth concept comes. Inclusive for thinking about giving other people the opportunity to advance. It is not about making everyone the same income. It's not about I rob a monopolist and distribute the income to all the poor people, but rather let us all think about how we can create more opportunity for more people so that they have the incentive to better themselves, to improve themselves, and then we have the market channel that it is merit-based, and if I can find something that improves myself, it very often will be a case that what I do improve the well-beings for others.
How can we do that?
The government has a role to play. Always advocate competition, anti the super powerful. Okay. Number two, do the best you can to separate business from politics. I do not mean that politics is to be away from business, but politics and business should not be tied by the same individual. I'm talking about separating individuals' participation in politics and in business together. So in other words, I want government to be pro-market, but not pro-business. When you're pro-business, you combine business and politics. When you're pro-market, you separate business from politics, but rather you use politics to empower the equal access to opportunity, to allow the market to be a disciplinary force against the monopolists, against the entrenched, against the inefficient, and so on and so forth. Number three, education is important, and try to give all the new entrants as much help as you can, not in the sense of giving them handouts, but help them to have market opportunities.
Bernie, you've spoken about the role of government, philanthropists, corporations, and education in encouraging inclusive growth. What's your one piece of advice to the leaders watching this interview of one thing that they can do to encourage this concept?
Have a sense of purpose. Believe that you can make a difference. If everyone has a caring heart and have a sense of purpose that they can make a difference, collectively, we will have a wonderful world.
Let's recap 3 key takeaways from our interview on inclusive growth with Dean Bernard Yeung. First, inclusive growth isn't about income redistribution or CSR programs. Creating a business ecosystem which includes diverse local businesses requires governments, business leaders, and educational institutions to all work together. Second, the inclusive growth concept is especially relevant for Asia, where despite rapid economic progress, many local businesses are still cut off from much of this opportunity. And finally, inclusive growth requires governments to separate business from politics, using political tools to empower greater equality and access to opportunity. Thank you very much, Bernie.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on Driving Growth.